It's a Mississippi State Monday with Joe Moorhead having his weekly press conference for Bulldog fans. And Steve, we had a little bit of news here and there, but primarily the talk was about, yes, Mississippi State, now ranked number 18 college football playoffs, expects to go a few points this week, going against number one in everything, defending national champions, winning streak. As Coach Moorhead said, the gold standard of this league and the top of the mountain. We know who he's talking about.
And we can use all the superlatives that we want, David, and it still wouldn't be adequate. I mean, the bottom line is Alabama is the class of this conference in the country, for that matter. I mean, and Nick Saban, arguably the greatest college football coach of all time, and that includes the Bear. And that's being honest. I mean, we're witnessing a very dynamic and glorious era of Crimson Tide football. Mississippi State has not fared well against Alabama in recent years, but not a decade now. But since Sylvester Croom won back-to-back years, in 06, 07, matter of fact, the first year of the Nick Saban era, we get a win over there, and so we win here, pardon me. But the glory days of Mississippi State football included a win over everybody in the Southeastern Conference except the folks in Tuscaloosa. So Joe Moorhead will look to kind of reverse that trend this weekend.
Well, certainly you would think that Moorhead is going to approach it with a different attitude, as in, for all his strengths and virtues as a head coach, Dan Mullen let this game get to him repeatedly. We saw it in 2014 most of all. I think they turned training camp that week into almost a prison camp atmosphere, and it really showed in how tight they played. And they've gone over there loose and not played well. But last year when State had a chance to force it into overtime and gave up that fourth down conversion, I think we all know in retrospect that ended the Dan Mullen era at Mississippi State. And now he's moved on, and now it's Joe Moorhead's responsibility to, as he says, chase the standard.
Well, I think there are a lot of Bulldog fans and Bulldog players who feel like they missed the golden opportunity last year. Matter of fact, Alabama outscored State 14-3 in the fourth quarter, the decisive quarter, and State really had control of the game throughout until that fourth quarter. We all look back at that touchdown pass from Jalen Hurts, and that's a guy that has had good games against Mississippi State. Don't expect him to play a lot this weekend, but we'll see. The bottom line, though, David, is that the Bulldogs aren't playing the last 10. They're not playing last year's. As Joe Moorhead said, they're not looking through this as a historical matchup. It is about the X's and O's and the matchups that are available at this point for Mississippi State. And thankfully, State has found some rhythm on offense, and they're going to need every bit of offense that they can muster this Saturday.
Yes, let's talk about that. Moorhead, because it's more pleasant to discuss what's going well for the Bulldogs. He talked about how the last two games they've found their footing, got a little more consistent, and in this past game talked about how they won all three phases, played their best game probably in several phases, including the field position battle, which he seemed kind of amused with, given State still has a few issues with the punting game there. But to us, we talked about it post-game. The big thing was they came off a big win with A&M, did not get down, and now you think they've got a chance to just go level-headed into it. And as he said, they're not going to change how they approach it. He just wants a heightened awareness of the matchup.
And now that sounds good in the press conference, David, but those players know who they're playing. There'll be no surprise at who's going to walk out of the locker room at Bryant-Denny Stadium. It's the defending national champion, Alabama Crimson Tide. And, yeah, you want to keep an even keel and avoid getting too high or too low. But the bottom line is that Alabama gets everybody's best shot. Now, there are a lot of times that you psych yourself out, as we've seen in many years at Mississippi State. You don't always bring your best effort. But the players, especially those defensive guys like Montez Sweat, Jeffrey Simmons, Jonathan Abram, Mark McLaurin, guys that have a pro football future ahead of them, these are the type of games that are big in contract negotiations. You go out and do it on a big stage on the road against an opponent like this, you've made yourself some money.
By no means are we implying the Bulldogs will be playing for themselves individually, but yes, that'll be in the back of their minds, as it will be for the Crimson Tide fans as well, because they'll be thinking, here's a game we can run up some points and get ready for the stretch run where they want to make another shot at the national championship. All right. Speaking of that, because as we said, they're number one. Mississippi State number 18 in the college football playoffs. I think they're ranked, 15th and 18th now in the voting polls, which at this point are pretty irrelevant. Good for pride points, but don't matter. Tomorrow night, the next set of release comes out. All four teams, including the 11 and 9 teams ahead of State, lost, so the Bulldogs could move up a good bit. They held serve by beating Louisiana Tech, and they're going to move up by virtue of losses. We've had a lot of talk today about bowls, and frankly, it's because we'd rather talk about that than about the game this weekend for a while. But things like that really matter. I mean, we tell people that even the way the CFP is presented is it only matters for the top four. That's not true. It matters in bowl participation as well.
That's true. And, 2015, by virtue of the college football playoff, Ole Miss goes to the Sugar Bowl. State wins that ball game. State would have gone because the highest-ranking SEC member not in the playoff by virtue of that season got to go to the Sugar Bowl. Now, that's not the case this year with the Sugar Bowl being involved in the playoff. But it does matter. And a lot of people say, well, if you're not playing for a national championship, it doesn't matter if you're in those rankings. It matters a lot more than people give it credit for. And so State is kind of in a logjam of sorts, David, right there with Auburn and Texas A&M and South Carolina, and we expect State to finish ahead of those.
Don't forget Missouri.
Missouri, that's a great one.
I've become Missouri's biggest advocate lately.
There's no doubt. And I've been a Missouri fan all year. I love Drew Lock. I think he is probably the most polished quarterback NFL prospect we have in the league right now. All due respect to everybody else. And you're saying, well, Steve, what about Tua? Tua's not draft eligible this year. So, so all that said, it's a great time for the Bulldogs, but you've got to hold serve. And I don't think there's anybody except maybe the truest of the true maroon that are thinking State's going to go win at Alabama this weekend. But if you can get through this week and then win the next two and finish 8-4, because of the fact there's going to be a lot of teams right there as Missouri, Auburn, A&M, that playoff ranking is going to make a big difference. That could be the difference in going to the Outback Bowl or going to Music City.
And, of course, already Steve and I are having to slap down a few people about who've all of a sudden become bowl snobs and think that State is too good or they're too good as fans to go to certain bowls. Hey, folk, try going a decade without a bowl and then tell me that you don't care about those things. But anyway, we mentioned that only because Coach Moorhead said they're not playing the history this week, and that's probably a very good thing given the history. All right, let's talk about the injury updates. Nothing really bad news today, but some interesting updates. I did ask him directly about Kylan Hill. Was he 100% tonight? He wouldn't say he was, but he wouldn't say he wasn't either. But he played the game very well, and he's still day-to-day officially, but we expect him to go. What are some other guys to keep checking on?
Well, Shamar Kilby-Lane, reserve linebacker, and he's been beat up a little bit this year, but Coach said he's dealing with a lower extremity issue. Osiris Mitchell took a pretty good shot to the chops early in that ball game. He's dealing with an upper body injury. And then Jaquarius Landers is a guy that Coach said is listed day-to-day. We fully expect him to play on Saturday. But with Brian Cole's injury at that position, that's a situation worth watching. Jaquarius Landers is the hero of the A&M ball game, one of his better games of his playing career, and then Marcus Murphy's played a lot more as of late. But if Landers is a little bit banged up, then that means Murphy is more of a part of the game plan. So that's something that we'll watch as we get into the week and we speak with Coach Shoup on Wednesday. We'll certainly ask him for an update. And,
of course, tomorrow evening we'll get a chance to talk to the offensive staff, to Coach Getsy, Coach Fitzgerald. I call him Coach. He might as well be a coach because Nick Fitzgerald has really taken charge of this offense the last few weeks. And I've requested Kylan Hill for an interview as well to get an update on how he feels, but more about how all of a sudden he's as big a threat in the receiving game as his running game, which is another reason, Steve, I think you're seeing the offense Joe Moorhead wants to run. He said he came out and said he doesn't care if he hands it off or throws it short, throws it long. He wants the ball in his playmaker's hands, i.e. Kylan Hill's hands. So we're seeing the offense we really thought we would see back in September.
It's true. You're seeing more of those 50-50 balls. And I asked Coach specifically about Nick's ball placement, about his posture in the pocket. He has done a much better job of that. And so he says, he hates to use the word, scale back or streamline. They didn't do much of that. They've just kind of simplified some things to give him some more confidence in the pocket. And the pass protection has been better. But you're right, David. We're seeing the running backs get the ball in their hands in a variety of ways now. It's not just as simple as handing it off and running off tackle. They're finding a way to use those screens and swing passes to get them the ball in space, but also, too, Nick Fitzgerald's making plays down the field, and so as a result, those safeties are having to back out of the box. So the Bulldogs can be a little more multiple, but you're right. We're seeing more of the components of this offense that we expected to see all along.
And quickly to wrap up today's talk, even though it has nothing to do with the press conference, you were out of town yesterday, but if you and Paul had a chance to get in touch with any of the prospects from this weekend, or maybe kind of an update on who we're recruiting is now State gets into the November schedule.
Yeah, well, one thing is, and we just found out too, their Arkansas game is going to be an 11 o'clock thing, so that's going to impede your ability to host prospects. And so that's something that I think that sometimes is a little bit maybe taken for granted with fans. They think, oh, well, we should be able to get everybody here. Well, this past weekend you had your home state rival at home in an SEC game, and you had a non-conference game, and so a lot of the players went there. But, yeah, the reaction's been good. The main thing is that people are having confidence in this staff and confidence in this scheme. A lot of these defensive players, guys like Nathan Picker and Jerry and Jones, they're excited about this defense. I think Bob Shoup has made some fans with recruits around the state this year thinking, this guy knows what he's doing. That's why this weekend is so big, because even in the event that State can compete in this ball game and slow them down a little bit, I think that's huge because of the fact it's just further evidence this Bulldog defense and this Bulldog program is on the right track. And so we'll see how that develops. But that 11 a.m. kick makes it very difficult for players to play a ball game Friday night. And there are a lot of regular seasons that are over, but the ones that are in the playoffs, which a lot of times are going to be your teams with SEC prospects, they're going to play a game on Friday night. It's tough to get a stiff and sore body into a car and then drive the distance up here on Saturday morning. So anybody that makes that trip in a couple of weeks is somebody that's really serious about Mississippi State.
So we'll talk later in the week and try to catch up on any of the recruiting reactions that Steve and Paul have been able to collect from this, and particularly in our two obsessions now, offensive linemen and wide receivers. We'll see if there's anything new in those developments and other items there. And, of course, remember, Bulldog basketball is getting going again this week. They finished an exhibition season over the weekend. The Lady Bulldogs and the Bulldogs themselves had a couple of easy, what you'd call exhibition shows, just had a nice, enjoyable start to that. But that really gets going this Friday evening. Of course, we won't be making the basketball because we'll be getting ready to go to Tuscaloosa. You and I will be there Saturday. And so if it happens this weekend, hey, we can always maybe even do another bumper sticker to go with the two I have from 1980 that says, I was there. Now, I won't talk about the bear, but if you're there, it'll be a part of history. So a lot to catch up on this week, but we're filing our stories now. And so for our whole staff at Gene's Page 24/7, here at the Seal Building after Coach Joe Moorhead's morning press conference, for Steve Robertson, this is David Murray.